welcome to PRI's annual Year-End Awards. So we've got our All-Stars ready to tee up their awards. We've got Lance Izumi, PRI Senior Fellow in Education, Kerry Jackson, Senior Fellow in California Studies, Ben Smithwick, Vice President of Development, Tim, our new Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and I'm your host, Rowena Itchon. So we're going to launch the awards with biggest winner of 2022. So this is a little self-serving, but I'm going to go with the homies at PRI. So this year we won a Marketing and Communications Award for our two projects, the Sequel Gauntlet, which is a flow chart that shows what a complicated mess the California Environmental Quality Act is and why it's responsible for so much of the delayed building in the state. The study was authored by Chris Carr and his team at Paul Hastings. And our cup runneth over because we have two winners in this category. Our Homeschool Boom book, which was authored by, of course, Lance Izumi. And special thanks to the team, including Tim Anaya and Emily Humple and Dana Beagle, our graphic designer, for putting all this great stuff together. That's great,
Ro. I mean, great winners there. I think the biggest winner for me are the parent school board candidates who won all across the country. This rising up grassroots revolt of parents that have taken over school boards from Florida to California, I think is a huge phenomenon and something that's going to have major repercussions, throughout politics and education policy into the future. And very happy that a lot of those parent candidates who were successful attended our recent PRI school board training event in San Diego a couple weeks ago. And, it looks as though, they are already enacting some really major policy changes, which is going to be really terrific, I think, for the students eventually in those districts.
I'm going to go with Kevin Kiley, who's a good friend of PRI, who's now the House of Representatives of the 3rd District of California, who won that race, has moved on from the California legislature. And as I say, he's a friend of PRI, and I think we tend to like the way he voted while he was in the legislature. And I particularly remember him being what I would consider a voice of reason and a voice of freedom during the pandemic, when our experts were telling us we had to hide away and hide our faces, and his response was completely different to that. So he is my biggest winner of 2022.
Continuing on Kerry's political theme, my biggest winner was Lee Zeldin. And although he lost his race for governor in New York, he was able to boost support and turnout for a lot of down ballot candidates who were aligned with his vision and ultimately did win. He also made the race pretty competitive in a blue state by rightly focusing on the crime issue in New York, which I think in turn caused Governor Hochul and the other Democrats to start taking the issue seriously. And I think he has a promising future in politics.
I agree, Ben. And, Speaker McCarthy, his first thank you note should be to Lee Zeldin, because that effort in New York really won them the House majority. Mine, I feel like a little bit of a broken record with this answer. I know I've given it at least once or twice before, but for me, again, it's California Governor Gavin Newsom. He dispatched his Republican opponent, Brian Dahle, with ease in the general election, while really spending most of the fall campaign promoting the California blue agenda and burnishing his natural liberal credentials in fights he picked with Governor Greg Abbott in Texas and Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. And while he perhaps doth protest too much that he will not be a presidential candidate, he is clearly, after 2022, poised to roar out of California with a huge head of steam whenever the opportunity presents itself.
Okay, next up is Biggest Loser. Now, I hate to say this, but I'm going to have to go with the GOP. After a failed 2 years in office, President Biden's presidency is likely to go down as one of the worst in modern times. And the Republican Party couldn't even win the House in a big way and was set back in the Senate. So I think they have to do a serious postmortem on what went wrong. And I got to say, the second biggest loser are the pollsters, who all predicted a big red wave. And the public has become really skeptical of these polls, and they have a right to be so. What about you, Lance?
Well, I'm going to second your nomination for the polls. I think that, the red wave, the red tsunami that many people expected, were all based upon these polls, which, pretty consistently for months showed that there was going to be a large Republican victory in individual states. For example, in Nevada, Adam Laxalt was ahead in virtually every poll since September, and yet he still lost. You had polls in Arizona, which showed Carrie Lake in front by double digits, and she did not prevail. And so therefore, I definitely think that the polls were the major losers here.
I'm going to go with the Twitter censors, as well as the Twitter employees who are essentially being paid to do nothing. Musk, when he started looking at how things were being run there, I think he was saying I don't remember the ratio. I'm sorry about that. For every 10 people, for every one person coding, 10 people were doing nothing, something like that. But there were obviously, when you have that many thousands of people working in a company like that, I just couldn't imagine when I found out how many employees they had, what all these people could be doing. So these people are the biggest losers of 2022. And in my mind, their losses are well deserved.
My choice for a biggest loser was Amber Heard, who lost her defamation case to Johnny Depp. And all of my fellow podcasters here might recall that this was a big story during the slow summer news cycle of 2022. And I think as of the airing of this podcast, I guess they have settled the case, and Depp has reportedly pledged to donate $1 million to several charities. And it's really the charities that are the real winner. And the sad story, which took up too much of our attention, I think, past year.
So my big loser is Florida Senator Rick Scott, who ran the National Republican Senatorial Committee, which is charged with electing Republicans to the U.S. Senate. But he really ran it not to help his colleagues and future colleagues, but really as an exploratory committee for a future presidential campaign. He put out an ill-conceived policy agenda with controversial ideas on Medicare and Social Security that ended up being used against Republican Senate candidates. And even worse, the committee ran out of money in the fall, and they had to cut millions in television advertising in all these key battleground races, which gave Democrats a huge spending advantage. And in the end, he tried to take out our beloved Cocaine Mitch as Senate Republican leader, and he limped back to his corner after only receiving a handful of votes. How many losses does one man want in 1 year?
Great points, Tim. Now let's move on to the best idea of 2022. So I thought the best idea of 2022, going along the same lines as Kerry, is when Elon Musk bought Twitter. It was a bold move. He exposed the censorship that was taking place in Twitter. We all knew something fishy was happening there, but now there's proof. So let's hope he can turn it around and make it the open forum that it was meant to be.
Well, Ro, I am going to vote for Arizona's Universal Education Savings Account, which was passed by the Arizona legislature and signed into law by Governor Doug Ducey in 2022, and gives $7,000 to families to pay for private school tuition, tutoring, at-home curricula, and other types of education expenses. And it's universal, so that any family and parents and their children can use this education savings account provided by Arizona. So I think it's going to be a huge game changer, not just for the kids in Arizona, but I think it's going to be a real policy marker for the rest of the country to shoot at. And I think that it's going to really influence education policy going forward.
Well, like Ro, I'm looking at Twitter and Elon Musk as for the best idea of 2022, but it's not, for me, it was not for Musk buying Twitter, which was still a great idea, but the better idea was even releasing the Twitter files, which we've seen in the recent weeks of how utterly corrupted that entire situation was. I think we all knew it, but to see this come out and now has to be defended somewhere, it was just indefensible. But I think that was one of the best ideas, or the best idea of the year, was to release those files.
Well, at PRI's president and CEO, Sally Pipes, and other healthcare scholars have promoted the benefits of telehealth to patients and the broader healthcare system in terms of dollars saved even before the pandemic. And now there seems to be a momentum to make permanent changes that were made during the pandemic to make it easier for patients to utilize telehealth services. In July, Congress passed a bill to continue Medicare patient access to telehealth through 2024. But there's still a lot that can be done at the state and federal level to improve access to these vital services. And while this is a good start, I'm sure that PRI will be there along the way, providing policy guidance to policymakers and voters in this area.
Well, for me, while he got there in a really kind of backwards way, I think Governor Newsom's belated push to keep open the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant for a few more years while the state transitions to his really unrealistic all renewable power scheme is my pick for best idea of 2022. And let us hope that Governor Newsom learns from his baby steps this year and embraces more safe, renewable nuclear power as the only realistic way that the state will ever reach these kind of pie in the sky 100% clean energy goals.
Okay, now for the worst idea of 2022. Well, for me, I think this is hands down President Putin, who invaded Ukraine. It's been about 10 months now. The Ukrainians are still putting up a fight. More than 700,000 Ukrainians are now on active service fighting the Russians. And meantime, the Russian army is fragile, has low morale, and there's growing protest among Russians. It's a testimony to the Ukrainian people that they're fighting as hard as they can, as well as they can, given the circumstances. And I bet Putin now wishes he could turn back the clock.
Well, for me, Ro, the worst idea of 2022 has got to be critical race theory. It's a Marxist theory that separates people into oppressed class and oppressor classes depending on their race. And it's especially evil when it has been injected into education, as it's been done in all too many classrooms across this country. And, it's the reason why PRI will be releasing our new book, The Great Parent Revolt, about parents and grassroots leaders who are rising up against critical race theory in schools across the country. And this book was co-authored by myself, our own Mackenzie Richards here at PRI, and also Wen Yoon Woo, the executive director of Californians for Equal Rights Foundation.
Well, Roe is correct. The worst idea of the year was with Putin to invade Ukraine, but I have to have something different. So I'm going to go with masking is back in December. I don't know of any cities or counties yet that have gone back to mandatory masking in public or private places, indoors or outdoors, I should say. I think there's some school systems that have already done this with their students, but I don't know yet if it's been mandatory cities and counties, although I know I can tell that there are some public health officials, none of whom that I know or ever been elected to their positions, who want to go back to it. The lady in Los Angeles comes to mind. This is just a horrible, miserable, wretched idea.
My choice for worst idea, and I'm surprised it hasn't already been mentioned by anyone, is President Biden's program to expand student loan forgiveness. I think it's really a slap in the face to those who paid their student loans or took no loans, and really does nothing to address the underlying problems with student loan debt.
Well, my worst idea is that Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz would be great Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate. In reality, as we saw this year, they actually turned out to be probably the worst major party Senate candidates in recent memory and cost the GOP their shot at winning the majority in the Senate.
Okay, enough already is the next category. Now, I can't tell you how tired I am of Harry and Meghan, and I think this was my pick last year too. And I also think that the royals have really lost some luster with the death of Queen Elizabeth. Was the passing of an era.
Well, I would say that my enough already, it's got to be Anthony Fauci. Fauci, aside from the fact that, he's just ubiquitous and, spewing all the misinformation that he criticizes, but also he has said that he will not retire in the classic sense, even when he officially retires, that he will not retire in the classic sense and will still be involved in policy issues, to which I say enough already.
I'm going to stay on theme and go to one word. Enough already, mask.
My enough already for 2022 is the continued attacks on donor-advised funds and individuals who contribute to charities through donor-advised funds. They are popular among donors of all backgrounds, and they continue to be attacked by politicians like Sheldon Whitehouse and others who spread false claims and misleading claims about donor-advised funds and the individuals who use them and the charities that benefit from them.
Sheldon Whitehouse, the man who attacks so-called dark money, but yet his agenda is fully funded by dark money. But maybe we need biggest hypocrite of the year next year. But for me, my enough already are all of these liberals who, with very dramatic flair, are routinely declaring their intent to leave Twitter because their leaders are no longer manipulating the algorithms to promote their voices and silence the opposition. Much like all those liberals about 20 years ago or so who proclaimed they would lead the United States when George W. Bush was reelected president. They're of course all still there, and many of them are still there at Twitter. So I just have a simple piece of advice for them. Go already.
Okay, for the bummest rap. Now, I always have trouble with this category year after year, but it was a cinch this year. So my bummest rap is going to go to the Van Gogh painting, The Sower. These young Italian climate change protesters threw pea soup at the painting. And to what end? They call themselves the last generation. Well, they're just nothing but vandals and a disgrace to their generation.
Well, my bummest rap role was the canceling of Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who is an eminent professor of medicine at Stanford University, and his blacklisting on Twitter and other social media simply because he and others who had his views on school closures, on lockdowns, which dissented from the so-called consensus of the medical establishment, but because they dissented, that they were shut down. And I think that is a totally bum rap on them. Thankfully, under Elon Musk, those bans have been lifted, at least on Twitter. And I hope that people like Jay Bhattacharya and others will stoke the scientific debate to robust levels like we need to, and that we're not just forced to accept a manufactured consensus by establishmentarians.
Lance provided me with a great transition, because I know the bummest rap goes to Elon Musk. I won't say he was the darling of the left or the Democrats previous to buying Twitter, but they were never attacking him. But then he buys Twitter, and then he reveals what's going on there. And now he's just being slayed by the leftist media, politicians, celebrities, everything left and center, and everyone left and center seems they have to attack him in some way or the other, and it's undeserved. So I think he's getting a bum rap for doing what he should have done, doing what he did.
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint, but I did not have a bummest rap for this year. If anything, I think people, policies, and ideas didn't get enough of a bum rap this year across the board. And I liked a lot of your selections, but perhaps next year we can replace this with Biggest Hypocrite. As I think that could be its own podcast episode, given the endless possible answers there.
Well, for me, the bummest rap was really the caricature, as echoed by outlets like the Sacramento Bee editorial board, that the dozens of parents who got elected to school boards across California and across the country this year are really just religious zealots and bigots. After spending a day with a lot of them at PRI's recent school board training event, they're anything but that. They're parents and taxpayers who don't want to see their kids and kids in their community subjected to being bullied in a politicized classroom. And in very bad news for the left, not only were they successful in this year's election, they're just getting started.
So the next category is Sorry to See You Go. Well, for me, there were several people who I was sad to see pass from this earth. One was Sidney Poitier, who was a great actor. My favorite film of his was Lilies of the Field. There was Angela Lansbury, a legend. One of my favorites from MASH, Hot Lips Houlihan, Sally Kellerman. Nichelle Nichols, who was Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek. She was everything I wanted to be when I was a little girl. And of course, Olivia Newton-John. My brother had all of her records.
Well, for me, Ro, it's hands down. It's Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I grew up, as being a huge admirer of the royal family and of the monarchy in Britain. And she has always been a part of my life. I had portraits of her that adorned my bedroom when I was a little boy growing up because, I admired her so much. And she has just always been a part of my life. And to see her go just was a really emotional experience for me. And I must be honest, really caused me a lot of tears, especially watching the funeral.
Well, my sorry to see you go isn't someone who has gone on. It's someone who's still on Earth, but public image or publicly may not be seen too much. And I'm going with Herschel Walker. And yeah, Tim, you're right. He was not a great candidate, but at the same time, I don't think he was the worst out there. If the GOP had put some more money into that race in Georgia, it was close anyway. At least the polling right up to election day, or the runoff day, was very close. And if they had put some more money in there, he might have won. Again, not the best candidate, but I don't know why the GOP decided that was just a race they were just going to let their candidate lose. And sure, yeah, I'm a Georgia guy. I was briefly at school, University of Georgia, same time that Herschel was there, so there's a little bit of bias built into him. But he'll land on his feet somewhere. But I just think it would have been interesting to see him 6 years in the Senate and see what would have happened. So I'm sorry to see him go.
My sorry to see you go somewhat tongue-in-cheek is Nancy Pelosi, who's stepping down from her leadership role in the House. She was the first woman to hold House speakership and is the Democratic Party's longest-serving House leader. And I think that there will be a day, perhaps in the not-so-distant future, when Republicans will look back and probably long for the days when Pelosi was opposition leader.
Well, my sorry to see you go is the great Lucianne Goldberg, who was the self-described anti-MAME of the vast right-wing conspiracy. She played a starring role in the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal as the one who told Linda Tripp to wear the wire and catch everything on tape. And if you saw the recent miniseries, she was portrayed, I think, quite well by Margot Martindale. Now, you may have also known her from her days as a literary agent or as the proprietor of Lucianne.com. Now, I had the opportunity to get to know her a little bit years back, and boy, really all of my favorite memories of her are the time spent dishing on the phone with her while hearing the glass in her drink clanking. She was, in the best spirit of the phrase, a hell of a broad. Rest in peace.
So the next category is destined for stardom in 2023. I'm going to go with the obvious one because I'm going first. My destined for stardom is Ron DeSantis. The GOP swept Florida. He's going places. Governor, if you're listening, we would love to host you here at PRI in California.
Well, Ro, my destined for stardom actually dovetails with what Kerry said a few selections ago, is Kevin Kiley, the new congressman from up in my area, up here in the suburban Sacramento area. And he was perhaps the most effective critic against Governor Newsom and his policies during the lockdown. And he's been a great voice for conservative policy views in the state assembly, where he's been for the last number of years. I think that he will be a star in the Congress when he comes, when he gets sworn in, and especially on education policies. He will bring the fact that he was a teacher earlier in his career and vice chair of the Assembly Education Committee. And he's been a great friend to the Pacific Research Institute and my own work in education. And so I think that he's going to be a great star in this new Congress.
I'm going with Tim Scott, Republican U.S. Senator out of South Carolina. He's getting some media attention. He is well-liked. He is well-spoken. I think that the 2023 is going to be a good year for him. Now, I don't know if he's going to run for president in 2024, but I think he might. We're going to see a lot more of him. So I think that it's going to be a good year for him.
My choice for destined for stardom in 2023 is Wen-Yan Wu. And while she's already a star in our circle, having led the Californians for Equal Rights Foundation and co-authoring with Lance his forthcoming book on CRT, I think her background and experience make her a compelling potential national influencer when it comes to education policy, even to a greater degree than she already is. And I think we'll see more of her in the national education debates in the coming year.
My destined for stardom is Arizona State Treasurer Kimberly Yee, who I had the pleasure of working with back in the day in the Schwarzenegger administration. And after what was really a debacle for Republicans in Arizona in the 2022 election, nominating a lot of kind of nutty, unelectable candidates. Her star is shining brightly, having won the highest vote percentage of any statewide candidate this year. And I would say that Republican recruiters who are looking for a great future candidate for Senate or governor would be wise to knock on her door.
Okay, next category, destined for oblivion for 2023. I don't know if it's destined for oblivion forever, but it can't get much worse for cryptocurrency. With the market losses having been catastrophic, I made a tiny little investment in a cryptocurrency trust and I lost 85% of my money. It turned overnight millionaires into paupers. Now with this alleged fraud scandal, the so-called crypto Robin Hood, Bankman-Fried, I think this is just going to be the tip of the proverbial iceberg.
Well, I think, Ro, that destined for oblivion is going to be American prosperity. Congressional Budget Office just came out and said that it's more likely than not that the economy will actually shrink in 2023. We'll have higher unemployment. You already see huge layoffs on Wall Street and in other key areas of the economy. And inflation will likely remain high, at least by historical standards. So you put all of that together and the American economy and the average American is really going to take it in the gut. And I think that American prosperity, at least for this coming year, is going to be a thing of the past.
I think for me, this category should be called Hoping for Oblivion in 2023, because I would like to see AOC and Greta Thunberg reach a media oblivion this year or next year. Neither adds anything to any conversation, and yet the media dote on them and promote them as if they have something special to say, if they are some sort of saviors, if they're people we need to be listening to. And I long ago had it with both of them, and the coverage they get and the promotions they get. So I'm hoping that they will be in political and policy and media oblivion in 2023.
Well, circling back to Rose's answer from a few selections ago, I think that Russian President Vladimir Putin is destined for oblivion. The war in Ukraine has been a disaster for Russia, and while I don't see him necessarily being ousted in a coup attempt, the recipe is there certainly for a potential regime collapse due to lack of confidence in his leadership. So this will definitely be something for us to watch for in 2023.
Mine is now former Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, who basically ignored his day job this year as his attentions turned east. And meanwhile, the homelessness and crime problems grew worse every day. And his nomination to be ambassador to India continues to be stuck in the U.S. Senate with united Republican and now growing Democratic opposition following reports of sexual harassment scandals during his administration. And so it's interesting that, a man who has harbored presidential aspirations really hobbled out of office as the invisible mayor.
Free Marketeer of the Year. I'm going to mention an unsung hero, and I wonder, it's so obvious. Why haven't we picked him before? I'm going to go with Steve Moore. He's been championing free markets for 4 decades. I knew him back in the Reagan days when he was a young economist. I was just out of school with a little BA in econ, and he helped me tremendously. I learned a lot from him, and he's still out there fighting for free markets. So my winner goes to Steve Moore.
Well, Ro, I'm going to go with Elon Musk. So many times we've heard in the past when conservatives have complained about the social media companies that the response has been from the liberals that, just start your own Twitter or just start your own social media company. Well, Elon Musk bought Twitter, and now we have the free speech, at least so far, on Twitter that, that platform should have been allowing all these years. So now the left is up in arms over it, and I couldn't be happier.
My free marketeer of the year is not a free market economist or pundit or author or politician, but a fellow by the name of Pano Canales. And he did something very free market. He started a university, the University of Austin. And I don't think it's going to end up being a free market university, but it's going to be a university that's going to allow more choice in the education markets, more free thinking, more free speech, getting away from where we have gone with woke and CRT concepts in school. censorship, that sort of thing. So I think this fellow, he did, as I say, a very free market thing. So he's my free marketer of the year.
Well, I actually had a tie for this year's selection. I chose two individuals from PRI. The first is Sally Pipes, PRI's president, CEO, and Thomas W. Smith Fellow in Healthcare Policy for leading the educational campaign that's resulted in the defeat of the single-payer bill in January in California. And Lance, I also wanted to acknowledge you for putting parents and students first through your research on media appearances and your work on our before-mentioned school board training program.
All great selections, but my choice for Free Marketer of the Year, and there are many, they're the owners of the nation's broadcast and digital media outlets who were projected to take in about $9.7 billion in political advertising during the 2022 election. And it sounds like the free market is alive and well when it comes to spending advertising dollars.
Okay, now finally for our New Year's resolution, I'm going to go with the traditional resolution to exercise more, maybe take more walks, go to the dreaded gym. I'm also going to spend less because, as Lance alluded to, everyone's 401k plan and their assets took a beating this year. So I'm going to bypass, a posh vacation this year. What about you, Lance?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to the previous question and just thank Ben for his nomination for me for co-free marketeer of the year. Thanks a lot, Ben. I really appreciate that. My New Year's resolution is actually regarding my mom and dad. I want to be able to see them more often. I try to go down. They live in Los Angeles. I live in Sacramento, and I try to see them on average about every other month. But my dad will be 93 this coming year. My mom will be 90. I'm so blessed to have them still both with me, and I need to see them more often. So I'm going to try and get down there to LA to be with them as much as I can.
This is always the easiest one for me. I don't have to think about it one bit because I've never made New Year's resolutions. So on to you, Ben.
Thanks, Kerry. Sometimes that's a good thing. But my resolution for next year is to read more physical books. I think a lot of us at PRI spend a lot of time reading the news and certainly reading, and in some cases, proofreading material for PRI. But I think I would like to next year get back into the habit of having a book to read on the weekends or when I'm traveling. And podcasts are great, obviously, as we know, but they're not the same as a good book.
Well, my New Year's resolution involves a new mixer that I got this year with all of the fancy attachments for ice cream and pasta making and meat grinding. And though I was excited to get all of those things, I haven't really used it as much as I had hoped this year. So my New Year's resolution is to have more culinary experimentation in 2023 and use my mixer and all of the fancy attachments much more.
Okay, guys, so we're wrapping it up finally with predictions. So first prediction, what will President Biden's approval rating be 1 year from now in December 2023? So it's 44% today as I'm reading. So I'm going to say that it's going to be under 40, maybe even as low as 35%.
Well, I think that, as I mentioned with the implosion of American prosperity, I think that combination of a bad economy plus the Republican investigations that are going to be coming from the House into the Biden family and its business dealings with not just Hunter Biden, but with Joe Biden and all the rest of the Biden family. I think that combination is going to be lethal to Joe Biden's popularity. And I'm predicting 25%.
Wow. Well, I think this may be one of those how low can it go watches because, the economy is going bad. All those things that have been mentioned, the economy, the investigations, we have the House in charge of GOP in charge of the House now. I think it's going to easily reach Truman, Nixon, Carter territory as far as lows go. It's going to get pretty ugly for him.
Well, I think just in the wake of the last election, I predict it will probably be unchanged very much from today, probably in the mid-40s and perhaps a bit lower if the economy tanks. But other than the economy, I don't see a lot of factors that would swing things to a large degree.
Ben is exactly right. I say 45%.
All right. You know, Tim, we're terrible at these predictions, so hopefully one of us will get it right. So next prediction, who will be the leading candidate for the Republican presidential nomination 1 year from now in December? So I'm going to say Ron DeSantis, and I'd also like to see Tim Scott on the ticket.
Well, I would say that he's still the best counterpuncher out there, and I'm still going to say Donald Trump.
I have to go with DeSantis. That was my initial reaction to seeing this question, and nothing changes my mind. Even though I did say that I think Tim Scott is destined for stardom this year, but I think DeSantis. He has too much behind him. He's got experience, and I think he's gonna play well.
Well, you know, we live in interesting times, and I predict the candidate will be someone who is not currently on everyone's radar. And I'm not sure exactly who that is, but I think it probably will not be any of the current likely contenders, and probably somebody who's currently not in politics, my prediction.
Well, I agree that it would be Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, but I think the bigger question is, will he be a declared presidential candidate by then, or will he run at all? That, I think, is the real question of 2023.
All right, so this wraps up our year-end awards. How about our traditional tribute to John McLaughlin, everyone? So here we go. Let's try to do it the best ever, okay? So 3, 2, 1.
Bye.
Bye.
So Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year, everyone. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.